BSP and Land Bank were comfortably above. So now one is below and one is pasang-awa. You want your two development institutions to be pasang-awa or below? How do you fund development then?
We're going to leave it at that. Cliffhanger. Thank you very much, Stevie. Never enough time. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Happy New Year. But before we go, one final question. We have 3 photos. Upcoming guests for your Background After Dark. Right. Don't name names. Maybe just one. But describe why these people matter. Why we should know about them.
Okay, let's put the first one.
The first photo on, please. Let's see. They will flash.
Well, if we're going to get to it.
We do have there. Who is
okay,
this?
That's not the first one, but this is a global investment banker who I consider the LeBron James of investment banking. He's not this week, he's the week after and everything. I think you will find it extremely interesting. And the people who work with me or who are international investment bankers may know who he is.
All right, next photo, please.
These are the people on the left and right are the one on the left, the Filipino-looking guy is Filipino. He's the head of Vice President for Arts and Planning of the New York Philharmonic. And the guy private equity because he and his partner Javi Infante are the founders and managing partners of Navigar, which is the Philippines' largest Philippine-only focused private equity firm. They have very many prestigious investors, including, I think, IFC, ADB, and other people. So they're on fund number 2. And so this is this Friday's talk about the private equity business.
All right. Exciting, exciting. Thank you very much, Stevie. We are going to catch it this Friday. Thank you again to the Background After Dark for joining us this afternoon. We'll see you soon.
See you next month.
CEOs and boards, politicians even ask him for advice. Well, he's always jet-setting to somewhere and is hardly at a single place long enough. We're glad he can join us live this morning to help us kick this year off. But first, a look at the topics we covered with him last year. Stevie, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Stevie, hi. Okay, no crying on the show.
No, I'm not the type.
Stevie, welcome back to Market Edge. Hi, good morning.
Thank you for inviting me again.
I don't know if heads should roll or attitudes should change. Because what is the attitude we have generally, whether in the private sector or the public sector? You buy something, you keep it going until it breaks.
The most hysterical thing is that I am the least fashionable member of my family. I'm very proud to say I'm the only one who's never appeared in the society page. And that last picture was from Vogue.
From Vogue, I saw the feature.
What happened? My late mother must be howling. God, that her most unfashionable child is the one who pulled my
Who made it on Vogue?
To quote Jane Austen in Pride and Prejudice, my views are quite different. In fact, they are quite the opposite. It was funny, some questionable accounting and bad loans. If you look at what the analysis has come out, it's actually the opposite. It's an old-fashioned bank run done in a high-tech manner.
The entrepreneur has to decide first if I'm worthy of the money and I can convince them what type of money do I want. Do I want basically to be judged daily, which means be public, or do I want a little more of a runway to get to where I want to be, then go public? Then in that case you should go private equity.
But Maharlika basically says, your backstreet their equity.
What has been largely left out is what you're calling the trap of no exits. What do you
Yes.
mean by this trap of no exits?
In other words, it's completely within the management and board of Maharlika's rule whether to repatriate the profit if there is any, or the principal if it's time to return. You've seen, frankly, PE firms that didn't cover the Philippines or covered it as an afterthought, hiring people to take care of the Philippines or making it a priority. That's good. However, what have I heard from four of them? I didn't realize there's practically no manufacturing in this country. What am I supposed to do? Buy malls? You want to really keep the Spratlys, then effectively occupy it. Don't just dump some warship there and let it rust. Please put in perspective, the Spratlys have been a bouncing ball of sovereignty to nobody, to somebody, to everybody for a very long time. A special case is given for the armed forces and the police because, unlike other people, they put their lives at risk every day for our safety. If we're going to be fair, why don't we then reform everything? Abolish pork barrel, abolish all the other people who have unsustained or subsidized pensions. I mean, why pick on one group? In a company that has a very dominant leader, whether it's a family-owned company or something which has a long-standing person like Manny Pangilinan there, you basically have two models. You have the CEO, you have in effect what I call the leader for life and the leader for a fixed term. It's the problem with a leader for life. If you're a very qualified potential successor, how long are you going to wait? And you will be tempted to go somewhere else.
As always, never enough time. We're going to leave it at a cliffhanger. On that note, Stevie, never enough time. And on that note, still never enough time with Stevie. Thank you so much for joining us. Joining us live this morning in the studio, Stephen Konyang. Stevie, Happy New Year and welcome. I'm sure you can already guess my extra after this conversation. So before we run out of time, Stevie, I want to start with the Maharlika Investment Fund. The MIC, the head, Rafael Consing, and the board, the names have been revealed. Does it inspire confidence?
As I said, they're all, first of all, Happy New Year to the viewers. Thank you for finding discussions with me worth listening to. They're all individually qualified. The problem for me with the board is the same problem we have with the economic managers today. They're all individually qualified, but collectively, they're not as complementary as they should be. For example, I would have thought you would want someone with private equity experience. There's none. You'd like someone with multi-infrastructure experience. There's none. You'd want someone who knows how to deal with international portfolio investors who could be investors in what Joel Consing is saying are the sub-funds, which he's distinguishing from the seed investors. There's none. Now, individually, everybody's qualified. But when you were coming up with the three independent plus two regular directors, shouldn't you have added that into the mix?
Well, there is one other post that's still vacant, so hopefully one of the qualifications will fall.
I would hope they would, because, there are people. Now, the problem is the remaining post is a regular director. And would someone who is very highly qualified, he or she, in one of those fields, but isn't retired or isn't part-time, want to give up everything to be a regular director versus an independent? So that's the other complication, unless they can convince maybe one of the independents to become a regular director or something. I don't know. But I have no clue what the discussions are, who they're thinking of for the last slot, whether there'll be some movement, but I would like to think they'd at least fix one of those three shortfalls in the last open director slate.
But here's what we know. Over the weekend, you've got the MIC head, Rafael Consing, saying that he supports proposals for the Maharlika Investment Fund to invest in NGCP.
Yes.
The company company that's doing the power transmission here. Do you think that's a good move?
Why not? But again, are you going to do it as I would like to invest in NGCP or I better invest in NGCP?
What's the difference?
I like to invest means it's consensual. It's consensus. Both sides agree, and the valuation and terms are agreed. The other one is like, okay, if you have to be really old, like in the 50s to 1970s, 70 years ago, a lot of countries nationalized companies. They basically said you're being taken over by the government, whether you want to or not. As recently as the early 1980s, France nationalized the banks, BNP, Credit Agricole. They were all nationalized. It wasn't a discussion. Francois Mitterrand said you're being nationalized. The UK, British Rail, British Coal, British Airways, they were all nationalized, right? Now, then later, in the 80s and 90s, you did the reverse. You privatized, and that's where privatization came from. Initially, they started with nationalization, then privatization. So the reason I ask is it going to be something like it's government policy, we want Maharlika in, or it's a consensual discussion among parties willingly? And that's the difference. So the answer is, which will it be? Now, interestingly, if this is government policy, it is the first sign of the death of the Washington Consensus, which I think is overdue.
Which is the Washington Consensus means the private sector always does things better, right?
No, it just says everything should be left to the private sector. The argument is that they do it better, but I said, first, I would take issue with that, because let's not even say the Philippines. In 2008, General Motors had to be bailed out. All the U.S. banks except JP Morgan had to be bailed out. AIG had to be bailed out. They were private sector. If they were so good, if they did it better, why did they have to be bailed out trillions of dollars? Okay, so let's start with that. But the second is it's a matter also of policy. The motivation of the private sector is profit. What happens to development? What happens to national good? For example, if you look at China, they basically said electric vehicles, and more important, not just having electric vehicles, being the leader in the battery development in an electric vehicle is a priority. We will subsidize you. They basically chose a winner. You look at Japan, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, those were all selected by MIPI as winners 70 years ago. So it wasn't the market just divined that Toyota would be a good company. The market didn't divine that BYD and Geely and all these people would be powers in electric vehicles. The government said, you do it. The difference is they basically also had a problem for exiting and weaning them off subsidies. Something I'm also talked about on Maharlika. It's not just how you enter, it's do you have a plan to exit so that it doesn't become a perpetual subsidy. Now, you can choose to keep something profitable, but what is bad is to have to stay with something that's a loser.
I think everyone can relate to that. Stevie, shifting gears now, 2023, above all, it was still an inflation year. What did we get wrong? Did we get anything wrong? Big time. Whether it's macro, stock markets, China, US.
We got a lot of things wrong, as in you and me, as in prognosticators. 100% of the economists surveyed and strategists by Bloomberg said a recession. It didn't happen.
Not yet.
Well, yes, but they predicted it for 2023. I mean, if I predict a recession sometime in the next century, of course I'll be correct. If I expect a boom sometime in the next century, they were asking what was going to happen in 2023. And on the back of that, you were going to have a terrible stock market. No, they had double-digit returns, and in the case of NASDAQ, over 20% returns. And the other thing they got wrong was they said China was going to boom because of their belated reopening after COVID and the stock market being cheap. And no, they were one of the worst performing major stock market, and the economic developments were disappointing. While they reverted to growth, they were disappointing. So that's what they got wrong. Now, I think why were people in retrospect, so obviously this is not genius, this is analysis, why were they wrong on US inflation and recession? Everybody based that on the last time there was inflation in the US, which is the 1970s up to the early 1980s, and people like Larry Summers and everybody said it took not just high interest rates, it took sustained high interest rates to get the inflation mentality out, and to do it on a sustained basis naturally causes economic pain. Higher unemployment, higher interest rates, lower profits, which means recession. Why did it work this time and the immaculate disinflation happened and the soft landing so far? They're even saying, is it going to be a no landing? Okay, why is it at least so far? Even if, let's say, a recession comes, it will be later and it will be milder than expected. Why? The best analysis I read on this was Paul Krugman. He said, because inflation expectations were not yet embedded. So the actual remedies that were taking place, high interest rates, everything, took quicker to make behavior change. It didn't take longer to convince people. So in a way, you have to go back to longer history, which is right after World War II, when West Germany, the chancellor was Adenauer and the finance secretary was, I think his name was Erhard. There was high inflation. He said, don't worry, it will cure itself in less than a year because the supply chains and everything will even it out and it will go back to normal. And Adenauer agreed with him. They didn't panic. And a year later, it all went down and West Germany started booming. Because clearly there was big disruption. They were divided into West and East Germany. Okay? You cut the country into two. Of course there'll be disruption in supply chain. All right? But he said, don't worry, it will solve itself in less than a year. And it did. And maybe so both team transitory and team hard landing were both partly correct and partly wrong. And it was really a blend of both. You needed the hard medicine that team hard landing wanted, but it wasn't going to be as hard for as long as team transitory thought. So here is where we are now.
So in short, it seems like we underestimated the negatives. We overestimated the negatives for last year.
Yes.
Are we underestimating the negatives this
It's
year?
always possible. So we go back, it's the same 2 points. Larry Summers says, things have been better than I expected, but don't be complacent. And Krugman says, we've been pessimistic too long. We should not be so, looking in the rear mirror and keeping a recession from happening. So we shall see. It basically is the same argument because both are partly right and both are partly wrong. Now, with regard to the stock market, if you remember one of the things I said last year was, if you think there are going to be big macro trends, then the answer is, if the rising tide, the first tier people go down less and go up less. So the big move will come from the second tier people who could move up. Now, if you're going to say the macro trends we know, apart from, let's say, I would say there were 2 things which could surprise us globally, or 3, and 2 things that could surprise us locally. The 3 would be, let's say, if a very disruptive US election and a bad result happens, that's one, but that's towards the end of the year. Or let's just say the campaign becomes very violent, which for the first time might be possible. The second would be something with regard to Ukraine and the Middle East becoming a regional war and oil being used as a weapon again. So let's assume those 3 don't happen or they're benign. The 2 local things, which I think are good or bad, would be, first is the quietly predicted extreme slowdown in BPO employment. I mean, actually reduction in BPO employment going to happen or not?
You think it will?
I don't know. But very intelligent people are saying very alarming things.
Like what?
Like we're going to lose over 1 million of those jobs in the next 12 to 24 months.
Because?
Automation, two things. We are concentrating on the lower end of BPO business rather than the higher end, and the lower end is nurses. I mean, okay, it's not like anything new. The more mature a business becomes, the more it can become efficient and automated. AI or no AI. I mean, okay, 5 years ago, I was advisor to a group that we were looking to buy a controlling stake in Taskas. Eventually, I think it was, I can't remember who it was, I think Blackstone or BlackRock bought the stake, the controlling stake, when they went public. Even then, in 2017, I was representing a buyer who didn't win, and everybody was saying we expect employment to go down by 50%. So to keep employment flat, you had to double revenues. Now, at a time when people were growing their revenues 20% a year, that's why you didn't see unemployment. It's not because they needed more people. It's they won enough new business to justify keeping the headcount where it is and growing a little bit. Now, as I said previously, if you're seeing total revenue and total profit going down, hiring and unfortunately firing people is a lagging indicator. Now, a lot of the publicly listed in the US, because we don't have big locally owned BPO, which is another problem, two of them that I track have shown decreasing revenues and decreasing profits in 4 out of the last 4 quarters in 2023. Like, well, 4th quarter's not yet there, but if it was down first, second, and third quarter, I don't expect things to change in the 4th. So now what will happen in 2024? See, it's one thing if you kept growing, so you could justify to say, I grow 20%, I grow my headcount 5%, because I'm becoming more efficient. But now if it's going the other way, so that's the first. That would be very likely. Second, again, is our agriculture and food security issues. I mean, I'm very proud that I brought this up ahead of other people when nobody was thinking about it. And my point is, if food...
Ang buwan ng legislation pinagbayaan ay tumatalay sa may supang kasalukuyan at napanahon. Politika, opinyon, komentaryo at balita, ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang pinapanigan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Are going up and imports are not available to be bought. That's why you need to have domestic food security.
All right, on that note, I'm sure you know what I'm going to say. Never enough time.
But before that, happy birthday to 2 of my biggest mentors and supporters. It's attorney Ricardo Romulo's 91st birthday.
Wow, happy birthday.
And to Eduardo Mestre, my ex-boss at Evercore, it's his 75th birthday. Happy birthday too.
All right. And Stevie, just before we let you go, the Indonesian president is going to be coming here for an official visit, January 9 to 11. One word, what should we be on the lookout for?
Follow what they did on value add, whether it's agriculture or mining. They have got that right. And they have many of the same problems we have, which is lots of islands, lots of corruption issues, third and second generation politicians, but they got mining right, value added, they got agricultural productivity and also value added right. We can learn a lot from them.
All right. On that note, Stevie, thank you so much for joining us and Happy New Year.
Thanks again.
Never enough time again. Saw corporate transactions hitting a dry spell, deal makers globally missing the $3 trillion mark for the first time in 10 years. With these deals choked off by reluctant lenders and geopolitical flare-ups, the value of global M&As down roughly a quarter last year to just $2.7 trillion. This morning, global investment banker Stephen Kunyang weighs in on the local M&A scene with shakeups and unlikely alliances, plus his thoughts on the education crisis if we have time. Stevie, welcome back to Market Edge and happy Women's Month.
Well, thank you for inviting me again, and I thought it was going to be the first time we would be interviewed off Sky Cable, but as Mark Twain said, the rumors of my death have been grossly exaggerated.
But let's start with that. I mean, there's really so much dialogue about M&As happening, and not all of them actually do happen or materialize. But here's one that materialized over the weekend. I'm sure you've also heard of the RSA Sabina Boiti's MVP deal for that LNG terminal. I guess I want to start with that. Your thoughts? Are you surprised, or is this how it really goes?
Well, I don't want to say I'm surprised or unsurprised. I mean, I didn't know it was being prepared, but it makes complete sense because for LNG facilities and for power generation, especially for baseload plants, which an LNG natural gas plant would be, they are generally baseload. And you want baseload to be economic by being of scale. And it would be silly for the three of them to have three separate LNG facilities. So it makes sense to pool the resources for the LNG facility so that there would be scale, so that they would build the port so that it could handle large volume, not just storage, but input, and supply the plants there because it's already a hub. So it makes complete sense. Now, they're also, from what I read, going to co-invest in each other's LNG plants, which again, scale makes sense, and frankly, in their view, I suppose it also helps prevent ruinous competition. And given our reserve margins are, I won't say lacking, but they're definitely on the lower end of what would be considered prudent. We do need new capacity, and I suppose they just want to make sure they are all in so that the number one distributor in the country has ample supply, and among three of the four largest generators, with first gen being the fourth, also have long-term contracts to justify the investments in new baseload plants. So I think it's a reasonable deal that makes economic sense.
It's a very colorful relationship among the three gentlemen, competitors in some industries, allies in others. So that deal worked out for MVP. The other deal, the PLDT Sky deal, didn't push through. Does that say anything about... Go ahead.
Okay, rather than talk specifics on the deal, given I wasn't involved and I don't need to repeat what was said in the papers, my view is there are two things which I think are worth basically reducing in Philippine M&A. One is, I don't understand why a relatively straightforward deal took 10 to 11 months to review. There's normally a timetable from which the regulatory authority is supposed to review and give their feedback. And recently, there have been, let's just say, delays beyond the 90 days. If they were very complicated deals, I understand. If they're relatively straightforward, they should. So basically, the world at which the deal was struck might not be the same 10 months later. So that's number one. I think it took too long to get regulatory approval. The second thing is, in other countries, there usually is a basically provision where the buyers put some money in escrow, and if it's cancelled unilaterally by the buyer, he has to give that up. Or there is what's called a break fee. That has not been the normal case in the Philippines because generally deals happen, number one, or number two, the buyer is in such a relative position of strength that they walk away if they change their mind. And frankly, maybe it's time for some of the sellers, if they do have the wherewithal to impose it, to start thinking of imposing break fees or escrow payments which are defaulted if one side unilaterally says no. Now, you can always put caveat that it's also contingent on no material change and, frankly, regulatory authorities deciding within a reasonable amount of time. But that would be, I won't say standard practice, but is common practice elsewhere. Maybe that's something that's not something that needs to be imposed by the regulator. It's maybe something that the parties should negotiate for, number one. But number two, on the regulator side, I really don't see why reviews should take that long. I mean, I'm happy for it to be explained to me why it took that long, but on the surface, I don't think there was any justification for it.
You know, Stevie, when you look at the characters of the different M&A noise that we're hearing, it seems like Ramon Ang is emerging as the master deal maker. I mean, he's part of this mega deal. He's merging his tollways business with MVP. He did win the NAIA rehab project, beating the consortium of the 7 biggest companies in the country. How do you make sense of that?
Well, I mean, again, maybe let me delve to a point I've raised separately, which is in competitive bids, super consortia rarely win.
Why not?
Because let's assume let's say you have 3 major players. Let's say one wants an IRR of 20%, one wants 18%, the other one wants 15%. Guess which one they'll go with, the 20%, which will result in a lower bid. Second, let's assume when they're evaluating the prospects, let's say in the case of NAIA, one has more conservative assumptions, the other has moderate assumptions, the other one has aggressive assumptions. Guess which will be followed if you all have to go to a lowest common denominator. You will use the highest IRR and the lowest growth assumptions because you have to satisfy everybody. Then the third aspect is if there are special situations which makes one of the bidders basically have either synergies because he has related businesses that will benefit, or he wants it more, or it's transformative, he or she probably would not be able to convince the others to do it. While if there is one dominant shareholder, then that dominant shareholder can basically tell the other members in the consortium, I'll make it up to you this way or that way, but given I'm basically the person driving this transaction, I want it and I want it that strongly. So you see in competitive bids, and this is not just in the Philippines, this is across generally, that the people who have a dominant player in their group usually ends up winning. Now, major consortia generally win when there is a negotiated bid, because at that point, the seller, the government, the proponent, whoever, has a very clear thought of what is his minimum return, what are the requirements he wants, and therefore, all the bidders have to bid at a minimum on that basis. And then, it is basically who wants it the most, and from the proponent's point of view, who has the highest likelihood of completing it. So then, in those kinds of bids, you see in a negotiated bid, you see the strongest consortium on paper usually winning. So it's basically psychology and group dynamics.
Stevie, I wonder, because you've done mega deals here and abroad. How would the M&A landscape in the Philippines be unique compared to the deals that you've done elsewhere? Where are we?
Well, okay. Basically, if you look at most of the deals in the Philippines, it's a very big player normally buying out smaller players. You very rarely see merger of equals or a takeover of a business of by one equal to another. So you will basically, in other countries, you see a mid-sized company buying another mid-sized company, a PE firm buying an entity, or two big companies buying each other. So therefore, there is a lot more equality of interest or size and negotiating power between the buyers and the sellers, or the proponent and the proposer. So you see a little less of what you see where people agree to a deal and walk away. The other thing, to be blunt also, is you generally see, unless there's a huge mistake made in the bid, and they use that as an they don't say that's the reason, but they walk away for that reason. You usually see in a must deal that the chances of failure generally tend to be lower. So like NAIA was seen as very important by Ramon Ang and San Miguel for its deal, so they did what they did. The second bidder, who was disqualified, also bid very aggressive financially. Now, in some of the deals I've done in the past, I don't like to talk my own specific shop and deal, but they included the Lopez Group, which I represented when they sold some of their assets. It was considered a must deal by the buyer, and therefore the buyers didn't walk away and no break fee or escrow was needed. But when there's a disproportionate, or it's competitive and you don't want having chose someone to walk away, internationally you often see, as I said, a break fee, or an escrow that is defaulted if one unilaterally walks away.
All right. Exciting, interesting thoughts there on M&As. Stevie, I want to shift a little bit now. The president is back in Australia for the Australia-ASEAN Summit. Is there anything sexy about Australia's business playbook or ties with Manila that we should watch out for? It's his second trip to that country in just a week.
Well, I don't want to repeat what I've already said about state visits. They're useful for policy and everything, but specific deals are in place and negotiated regardless of the state visit. It's just, there. Now, what Australia brings to the table, which they're globally competitive, is usually in the resources space, and they're also quite advanced in food processing. So those are two areas which I think maybe the president's visit will help push a little more if he can convince some of the potential players that not the Philippines is open for business, but the government will be proactive in helping shepherd the process to have these investments in resources, and especially in not just in the downstream part, but in the more midstream and processing parts, in nickel and other places. That would be very useful. And in food, I think we're quite advanced on our own, and frankly don't need anybody. If you look at URC, they're a major player in most of Asia already in processed food, and they've done that on their own. We didn't need anybody transferring their technology or their systems over to us. So I would think the primary benefit would be in the resources space.
What about the education space? Stevie, over the past couple of weeks, so many of the Chacha proponents have been saying, education is going to benefit greatly if we allow foreign investors to own 100%. I mean, think about Harvard setting up shop in Manila, or Yale, for example, or Stanford.
Let me be very blunt. That is highly unlikely, because will there be a big enough market for them to open universities? Second, if you look at the universities, none have opened in the last 15 years, because I don't wish to talk, but I will be ending my 9-year term on the Asia Advisory Board of Wharton this May, all right, or June, I can't remember the exact month. And when I was there was great discussion whether Wharton should follow the role of Chicago and INSEAD in opening a business school in Asia, and frankly, Yale, as there's also been discussion, because there are different traditions on academic freedom on the band. Like, for example, like I know this for a fact. Evercore in general likes to hire their MBAs only from 4 schools for the US anyway. It's really just Harvard, Stanford, Chicago, and Wharton. Don't ask me why, but that's what Evercore does. And they wouldn't hire people from the Chicago school in Hong Kong because they basically said, while it is the Chicago program and there are Chicago professors, it is at the University of Chicago in Chicago. And in universities, actually, who really makes the university great are secondarily the teachers, but primarily the quality of the students. Like in Stanford, there are more valedictorians that apply to go to Stanford than there are places. So it's that kind of quality. So my view is, and if you look at where, in other countries, you've actually had much more action below university level, where you have international school or international degree type high schools and grade schools. But that's frankly an elite thing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's quite good, but it is not going to affect and improve the major challenges in Philippine education, except maybe tangentially. It might force some of the leading local schools to improve their game, and I don't see any harm in that. But to think this is going to be the magic elixir that will cure the many I'm very proud that 2 of the issues I brought up very, very early, as early as maybe 2-3 years ago, were education and agriculture and mining. Those are 3 things. Well, mining, maybe all other people talked about it too, but on agriculture, way before, and education, I said, when people say the Filipinos world class, we have tech savvy, far from it. I mean, the results have come out since. I'm not going to repeat what I've said, but I don't have any objections to opening the education sector. I just don't think it is going to cure the problem. Because they're not going to get into mass education. In every country, that is the government's job, to provide education for the general population. And you don't need foreign capital or foreign institutions to do that. If you really wanted their expertise, then hire them as consultants. I mean, it's really up to the government for the public school system to improve their game. As I said, it might help some of the leading institutions become a little more professional for fear of losing some of their students. But given the price points for when foreign entities set up educational institutions, it's at the very lowest, the very highest middle class that they target, and the elite. That's it.
So we only have ourselves to depend on to solve this learning crisis.
I mean, my point is, a lot of times, as I've said the previous show, I don't have objections in principle to opening up the economy. My only objections are to the commanding heights, because certain things you basically want to make sure you control it over, and especially when the private sector is very active in them, that it's the private sector who has primarily the interest in the Philippines as its main objective. Because again, people think there's a magic bullet with foreign investments. They get bankrupt too, they have challenges too, and they have to budget where they get the most return. And it's not necessarily going to be the Philippines.
All right, Stevie, on that note, never enough time. On the commanding heights note, thank you so much for the insights this morning and for giving us a little bit more deeper picture of the M&A scene and your thoughts on education. Again, thank you for the time. We'll see you next month, I think, in studio, right?
Yes, in studio in April.
All right. All right. Thank you, Stevie. All right. We'll see you soon. Bye. Have a great
Bye.
week. In this month's Stevenomics, we talk about the Philippines as the last holdout on divorce and why that shoulda, woulda, coulda soon change. Plus, the real state of global trade and how the world has moved on from the Washington Consensus, and a 6-letter company you should seriously consider adding to your portfolio. Without giving too much away, ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Conyang joins us live for this month's Stevenomics. Stevie, wonderful to kick off the month of June with you. Hi.
Well, welcome back, and I hope your daughter and you are doing well.
We are. So we don't have much time, so I want to jump in right into our first topic. Let's begin with the end. Ending a marriage. Getting officially unhitched. You know, Congress last month, for only the second time, passed a bill on absolute divorce. That will need the Senate's approval before it gets to the President. The question is the Philippines ready to move on from the biblical verse that what God has put together, no man shall separate?
I got news for you. We already moved on.
We have? All right.
No. You tell me, does it stop people from getting separated? Does it stop people from having second, third, fourth families? No. Second, has it even stopped the country from having divorce? No. You're Muslim, you got married under Sharia law, not only can you get divorced, you can have 4 wives. Okay? People don't realize PD 1083, which is still allowed, you can have 4 wives as long as they're in 4 separate households. You treat them equally and you can support all of them. And you can get divorced. So, you can, now, another thing, you're a Filipino, married a foreigner. You can get divorced. Ironically, it's a really stupid divorce law. It's basically, the Philippines says, if the foreign spouse initiated the divorce and it's granted, it's valid. If the Filipino spouse initiated the divorce, it's invalid even if it's granted. So in other words, let's say somebody tried to kill his Filipino spouse and is in jail, and the husband or wife wants to file a divorce. It's granted in the US or wherever he or she got the divorce, but it's not valid in the Philippines. Now, a Filipino tried to kill his foreign wife or husband, and the court said, how dare you kill me, I divorce you. That's valid. So if they tried to kill the Filipino and he or she files a divorce, it's not valid. If you try to kill your husband or wife and they divorce you, it's valid. You can marry again in the Philippines. Stupid. Alright? So rather than rehash all the arguments of everybody, and let me give the benefit of the doubt of sincerity to those on my side who think it's an abomination that we are the last real country in the world that still has no divorce, at least no divorce for everybody else except Muslims and those married to foreigners. And the people who believe divorce is the end of the world if we grant it, I grant them their sincerity. Okay? Mm-hmm. But here is why I think it's completely inappropriate and even unconstitutional. What is Section 1 of Article 3, which is the Bill of Rights in our Constitution? What does it say? It is famously known as the Equal Protection Clause, which is copied from the US Constitution. Okay? Let me read it exactly. Section 1 of Article 3 provides, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law now, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of the laws. So example, you cannot tell one guy it's okay to kill somebody in cold blood and the other guy no. It's just illegal. It's legal to have freedom of speech. You cannot say one guy you can freak speely, you cannot. That's equal protection of the law. So why are 6.4 Muslims, as long as they got married, covered by Sharia law, okay? And 84% not okay? That's not equal protection. Add in Filipinos married to a foreign spouse, or I suppose with dual citizenship or whatever. Why are we creating exceptions?
Why?
There should be protection. It's because it's wrong. Now, if the church wants to impose it on its people, then you're not Catholic.
Ang buong station pinubaliya ay tumatay sa may subang kasalukuyan at naon. Politika, itlong na komentaryo at balita ang programa ay patas sa lahat. Walang pinikilingan, walang pinapanigan at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay pang-service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
So you're telling me 7.82 billion people are falling apart and we're the only ones who are doing so well? You want to put religion and follow it, go ahead. But please don't impose it on people who don't follow it. And because, especially in this country, everybody loves to make everything personal. I am not divorced, I'm only married once. So just because I'm not divorced doesn't mean I'm against divorce. Right? I just think it is a basic human right. It is enshrined in our Constitution. And there is separation of church and state, and there's equal protection of the law. Based on those two, this is unconstitutional and immoral.
And this is coming from a guy who's happily married with kids.
I have 3 children. I've only been married once. I'm not divorced. Because you know what? I don't have to practice something to agree it is a human right and it is the human dignity and it is fair. Like for example, you're in favor of LGBT. Are you gay? No, I'm in favor of LGBT rights because if this is the sexual orientation you were born with, who are we to artificially stop you? Blame God.
So Stevie, are you confident that the divorce bill will finally survive this time?
No, I'm not confident because for how many hundreds of years the church has been able to stop progress in this regard. So I'm not confident. I hope it happens. We're only like 500 years overdue from making it happen.
All right, we're going to be...
When the church ran government, it was called the Dark Ages. When it stopped, it was called the Enlightenment. We need our own enlightenment when it comes to divorce.
All right. Stevie, speaking of unions, this time let's talk about the union between investors and economies. I wanted to ask, recently we've heard about Google and Microsoft investing in Malaysia, Nvidia investing in Vietnam's data centers. We've got our own PPPs, private companies building public infrastructure. The notion that private sector always does things better. The Washington Consensus, we've mentioned this several times before. I understand this is also known as neoliberalism, which has guided America post-Cold War from the 90s, simply telling us that market economics triumphs. You think that era is gone?
Okay, I'll tell you.
It's over.
True.
Or should be over.
It was fiction to begin with. Because they told all the emerging market countries, Latin America when they had their debt crisis, Asia we had a crisis, open up, privatize, let foreign investors take over, etc., etc. Then, by the way, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Then, what happened when it was their turn in 2008? Did they open up? Did they let Chinese companies buy American and European companies? Even now, no crisis. Are they letting Nippon Steel buy US Steel? No, they never practiced it themselves. They spent trillions of dollars bailing out their banks and companies to keep it American. Now, they also told us to do this, but they did the opposite. You cannot be in media unless it's run by an American citizen. Transportation has to be majority American owned. And most important, which I love telling all these people who naively believe what they're told, is CFIUS. CFIUS is the regulator on foreign investment in the U.S. That is the FIUS in CFIUS. CFIUS is commission. Okay? Now, they can reject any foreign investment of any size in any field as long as it's above $50 million and no appeal. Period. Okay? So that's how they do it. Now, my real point is, even lip service. Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor, was quoted in the New York Times saying, the Washington Consensus is a promise that has not been kept because it did not deliver inclusive growth. It delivered growth and wealth in every country only for the elite. And now, tiny, horrible countries like the United States is basically saying we're going to quadruple tariffs on solar panels and electric cars from China from a measly 25% to 100% so that American car companies have the space to charge higher than the Chinese will and build their market share. Then later, let's hope they do better. So they're doing exactly what the Chinese did when they developed and gave subsidies for their local market to develop. So nobody practices it. We're just naive enough to believe it.
Is it
And-
the lazy way, Stevie?
Yes, because I said, I quote the Kennedy. See, here's the problem with the Washington Consensus. It is the antithesis of industrial policy. Industrial policy is very hard. It's easy to get wrong, it's hard to get right, and it has to constantly change. So what is the result of our Washington Consensus people? It's the opposite of Nike. Just don't do it. Rather than do it correctly, admitting there will be difficulty and mistake, no, it's just don't do it. And what have we had since the early 80s happen to our nascent manufacturing and industrialization? It's gone backward. What have we become? A nation of exporters. The only thing is, it's the most raw export people. Now, Kennedy said, with regard to, can you put up the quote again? We do this.
The Kennedy quote, I think we have that.
Yeah, they flashed it a while ago. Can they flash it back?
Yes.
Because I want. This is the approach we should have. We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Difficult and important things are hard. Okay, now what do I think we do? Please put the other quote. We do this not because it is easy, but because we thought it was easy. I don't know how many times I've given talks in public forum and everybody asked me, what can we do in the short term? And I said, stop thinking in the short term. Because unless it's an emergency, you are just postponing solving a problem and exacerbating it.
But Stevie, this assumes that the government is able and up for it.
So again, you're following the philosophy. So if they're not capable, just don't do it. Rather than make the government capable. So let's not push it. Let's say we had a really lousy company that can't do it. So what do we say? Give up on capitalism? No, we say, let's get a better company or let's shift. Same thing. If industrial policy is needed for progress and we can't do it, what do we say? Just don't do it? Or let's find a way to have proper industrial policy. Do I say it's easy? No, it's very hard. It has to be changed. But our neighbors have done it with much difficulty, with experimentation, with changes, but ours is just don't do it. So exactly.
Stevie.
Exactly. So I mean, seriously, if a private company is lousy, what do you say? Get out of capitalism, get out of that industry.
Stevie, just very quickly, do you think the Philippines today is moving in the right direction? That we're also graduating from the Washington Consensus?
Let me be blunt. I am very pleasantly surprised by what I see as policy movement, at least of some government officials, including the president. There's still some government officials who are Washington Consensus types, but some are moving away from it, some are still mired in it. So from a policy movement, it's 40 years overdue, but at least they're starting to wake up. Now, how it will be implemented remains to be seen, but at least for the first time since the first late Marcos administration after the debt rescheduling, it's been complete monolithic Washington Consensus approach, even though, frankly, it should have been fine-tuned. Okay, in the early 80s, we had no money, we need this, we had to do that. But even other countries in the same situation, like Thailand and Malaysia, were much more nuanced and intelligent in applying it. Like, I'll give you an example. Cement prices were most expensive in Indonesia and the Philippines because they allowed foreigners to completely dominate it. They were lower in Malaysia and Thailand because why? After the 97 crisis, they said, we can't bail out all the cement companies, let foreign companies buy them. But what did Thailand and Malaysia say? But we will prop up the number one and save it as Thai and Malaysian owned so that it is a check on 100% foreign domination of the cement industry. That's being practical. That's being nuanced. That is hard but necessary versus the just don't do it approach.
All right. And speaking of companies, Stevie, we don't have much time. We have a minute left. There is one company, 6 letters. Let's not give away the name. Is it okay if we don't give away the name of the company? Just sort of like a blind item.
I have to, because I'm going to explain nuance. Because
all right.
I told you a few months ago, take a look at that. And why did I say take a look at it? I said it's grossly undervalued because the value of their education business is being treated at practically book value when it should trade at 3 to 4 times just on the education business. Now, they have since validated that thesis by bringing in KKR to take a minority stake. So the stock went from, and then the other thing I liked was if you looked at who was buying, every time somebody sold, it was half the time an insider was buying it, which told you they were confident in the company. So it was trading from 20 to 22 in that range. It shot up, now it's back to that range. So is it cheap? That's the good side. The negative side, which I hope the company addresses because they have a wonderful, education business, and they're going back to their traditional business before the financial crisis, they were the largest cement conglomerate in the country. Now they're coming back, so they clearly have the Oh, but yeah, that's another thing. Oh, private sector and foreign, so they have to sell to Holcim. What's Holcim doing now? Selling out. If it's so good, why didn't they stay? Okay, the difference a lot of times between foreign companies and local companies. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes systems. A lot of times it's just size. They come from a bigger market, and so they're bigger. And then we're so, galing-galing nila.
All right.
Sometimes, but getting back to Finland, the two issues are they have a relatively low market cap and very poor liquidity. Now, for the discount to be reduced, people have to be willing to buy it. To be willing to buy it, they have to be able to sell it. So my view is if the company can address some of the liquidity concerns, market making and all that, then it is very fundamentally undervalued because the management has created a very attractive business, but you can't just do it and be a small cap with poor liquidity. So they've made fantastic steps. They fundamentally addressed the business. But now, if they want the stock to sustainably trade at a level that is justified, they have to do some other things regarding their liquidity.
All right.
But moving in new direction. So it's also good because the money that they got for the education can now also be used for going back to their traditional businesses, which is cement and building products. So if you're willing to take a long-term view, it's very attractive.
And Stevie, blind no more.
I have no dealings with FINMA, okay? I'm not their,
you gave it away.
I'm not their investment
this
banker.
Is FINMA.
I'm not Mercado Barcada who doesn't say who he is or what he does. I full disclose, I have no business with them.
All right. But this is the stock that you have been talking with me about for months now.
There's fundamental undervaluation, plus there's a very decent dividend yield.
All right.
And important, since people love foreign investors in the private sector, it's been validated by one of the most prestigious and largest private equity firms in the world, KKR.
And so now,
take my word for it, take KKR's valuation.
And now I'm sure viewers will be taking a closer look at this company. Stevie, as always, never enough time. We are over time, but good to see you. Looking forward to our July conversation.
I hope our viewers do not divorce themselves from this show.
I like that. Thank you so much, Stephen Cunye for Stevenomics this month. See you soon, Stevie.
Bye.
red, no trading week in the green as better than expected jobs numbers make the case for soft landing by the U.S. Here at home, the PSE index now on a 5-week winning streak jumps off from 74.67. Gasoline prices will see no change this week, while the price of diesel jumps by 1 peso and 20 centavos per liter. Kerosene too climbing by 70 centavos per liter. And later we will be joined by the biggest IT BPO company in the Philippines, Concentrix's Amit Jaga, to talk about the disability inclusion agenda as the world marks Global Diversity Awareness Month this October. And Stephen Almex talks political capital and new taxes. We begin with stocks in Asia up this morning after a stronger than expected jobs data underscored the health of the world's largest economy, boosting optimism for a soft landing. Looking at the board, Japan and Australia seeing very early gains. The Nikkei 225 up nearly 2%, the Kospi index by a quarter. Meantime, traders will soon be shifting their focus to China, which reopens tomorrow, Tuesday, following massive stimulus measures announced prior to the Golden Week holiday. The Hang Seng shot up to its highest since March 2022. Now, elsewhere, New Zealand bonds fell less than expected amid expectations that central bank will cut rates by 50 basis points this Wednesday. Stateside, let's flip the board. U.S. contracts are looking mixed, though not going very far away from the flat line. The S&P and the Nasdaq feeling some downward pressure, though not by much, just by less than 0.1%. Now, in commodities, oil drifts lower in early trade as buyers weigh Israel's potential retaliation against Iran for a missile attack last week, with President Joe Biden discouraging a strike on Tehran's crude fields. Now, here's a quick recap of what happened on Wall Street last week. The Dow posted a record closing high on Friday. The Nasdaq ended with a more than 1% gain as a stronger than expected jobs report reassured investors who had worried the economy may be getting too weak. U.S. employers added 254,000 jobs in September, the most in 6 months, while the unemployment rate unexpectedly fell to 4.1%. Policymakers will get one more jobs report along with inflation data ahead of its meeting next month. Now, traders are now pricing in less than a quarter point worth of easing in November after the Fed kicked off a monetary easing cycle last month with a 50 basis point rate cut. Small caps and financials outperformed, with the Russell 2000 index up 1.5% and the S&P 500 financials index up by 1.6. The S&P 500 has actually already posted 33 new 52-week highs and one new low, while the Nasdaq Composite recorded 98 new highs and 91 new lows. The dollar, meanwhile, enjoyed its best week in 2 years.
We saw pretty broad-based strength. There were, some places to nitpick, but big ads in services industries, food and restaurants, some ad in construction, which is positive for the manufacturing sector. Work week ticked down a bit. Wages, kind of continued at a lower pace. So not the perfect report, but that's kind of what you need for a soft landing anyway. Some broad-based jobs added, but nothing too concerning for the Fed, right, in the form of re-accelerating wage inflation. So kind of a perfect Goldilocks soft landing report. And again, just a positive to return to jobs being added and beating expectations as opposed to what we've seen in recent months.
Now, third quarter earnings for S&P 500 companies are expected to unofficially begin this week, with major financial firms kicking off the season. You've got JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and BlackRock reporting on October 11th, that is this Friday. Now, bullish investors are hoping that the results will justify increasingly rich valuations in the stock market. The S&P 500 is up 20.6% for the year so far. Now, another piece of good news, U.S. ports on the East and Gulf Coast had already reopened, but the clearing for the cargo backlog will likely take time. people, or 15% of the world's population, experience some form of disability, and disability prevalence is higher for developing countries. The World Bank says persons with disabilities are more likely to experience adverse socioeconomic outcomes such as less education, poorer health outcomes, lower levels of employment, and higher poverty rates. Our first guest today hopes to change that in their own workplace, and he is steering the conversation on how companies can be better allies. Amit, welcome to the program. Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Mimi.
All right. So first of all, I wonder, in Concentrix's universe, what is the disability rate in your own talent pool?
So specifically for the Philippines, about 3 years ago, we had less than 0.5% people with disabilities as part of our workforce. Very happy to report that this year we actually crossed 1.5%. So we almost have 1,400 people working as part of our workforce who have some sort of disability today.
And do we know the percentage of employees who self-identify as having a disability to employers versus those with invisible disabilities, or those who have disabilities that are visible only in circumstances?
Yeah, Mimi, that's a great point, because mental wellness is becoming a big aspect and there's still some taboos related with it. We are focusing a lot on making sure that employees feel very safe in declaring that even if they have neurodivergent disabilities, which sometimes are not visible, they are encouraged to actually participate in surveys where we try to get that information, but we respect employee privacy. But I think that my guess is that the figures will be like probably double of that there would be probably another 1,500 people who would have some form of neurodivergence disability, which they've not declared.
And of course, this is very big. This is very big coming from Concentrix. We know that you guys are one of the biggest IT BPO companies in the Philippines. I remember in 2022, you guys were crossing the 100,000 mark for the number of staff members spread out across your 50 sites in 20 cities in the Philippines. So when you've got a company like Concentrix leading this discussion, it carries weight. You know, business, we know, is a very powerful force. I mean, if businesses include persons with disabilities and their families, society will follow. But if businesses continue to exclude, it tends to worsen inequality, right, in society.
Absolutely, Mimi. And one of the goals that we have in our ESG statement is to reduce inequalities in the communities that we operate in. And it's not just about reducing inequalities, it's actually about real diversity and inclusion, because as you get people with diverse backgrounds into your workforce, you create a very diverse thought process of the organization. Just imagine the level of resilience people with disabilities have versus regular individuals, and how they can drive a very different level of conversation in building the resilience of an enterprise. So those are some of those very, very interesting things that we see as we have more diverse workforce coming in.
So aside from this resilience mindset, what are some of the special traits that you think PWDs have that business leaders like you may be looking for?
What we feel is that a large segment of the workforce in any developing world, specifically like Philippines, is ignored because they have some form of disability and they're not able to enter the workforce. And what we work on is to create systems in which we can actually encourage this special segment to be empowered and enter the workforce into the organization. And some of the things that you have to tweak, for example, how do you accommodate your hiring practices? Because if somebody is deaf or mute, they can't go through the same set of assessments that a regular person can go through. So how do you accommodate? And accommodation can come through in the forms of looking like accommodation which is very soft, which is just changing your assessment, to hard accommodations where you have to look at the physical space in which people work in, or the desktop that they use, or the system that they use, or sometimes just sensitivity, like how do you sensitize your managers, how do you sensitize your recruiters to take through the process. And that's what I think changes the game.
Is it more costly for a company to be hiring persons with disabilities?
Actually, it's not. It is not expensive at all. I think even the small investments that we make, I feel there is huge amount of rate of return on those investments. We recently had a forum with a lot of people coming in together and focusing on what kind of investments lot of return on investments, and a lot of things are just thought process change rather than anything else.
Thought process change. Really, it's the mindset of the people and the company. So you talk about the cost, which is not expensive. You talk about the benefit. We also often talk about the gender pay gap. Is there also such a thing as a disability pay gap? I mean, you said that you already crossed the 1.5% of your work pool as a person with disabilities, or 1,400. What else do we know about these people? Are they able to enter the company and graduate to managerial posts, for example?
That's a great point, Mimi. And see, as I said, one part is getting this divergent workforce into your organization. The other part is how do you grow them. And I think the first step is to create a network. You work with NGOs, you work with special organizations who are focused on training people with disabilities, so that you start creating a pipeline, and the first step is to get them in. But how do you groom them and how do you grow them is another challenge, because there are aspects which some specific disabilities, when you have some specific disabilities, you can't perform. For example, if somebody is deaf and mute, they cannot interact in the same way as somebody who's a regular person. So how do you create that environment where people can actually become managers? And for that, you have to have specific investments. For example, how do you train people around them who are experts in sign language? One of the projects that we did recently is, we partnered with a school where a set of very young, literally kids who are studying as part of the school, developed an app called Lies, which is nothing but it actually reads your sign language and converts it into text. You have those apps in where somebody who uses the sign language can actually interact with somebody who does not use the sign language and is not aware of the sign language, because the app is able to convert the sign language into text and the other person can just read it. Now, if you have something like that, it is very easy for somebody who's a frontline, workforce in your organization to graduate to managerial levels, because they have an app like this which helps them. So those are some of the things that you work on to groom people and take them to managerial posts.
So how many have actually graduated to managerial posts for Concentrics?
I don't have the exact number of people who've graduated to managerial posts, but I think the number is in the range of about 3-4% only. So, and I would say that, as we look at that, we've got almost 1,400 people now who are part of our workforce who come with PWD background. But if you look at the managerial number, it is still very small. So therefore, while we've come a long way, there is a long way to go.
All right. And it's great that we're having conversations like this with the C-suite, with the C-level executives. Would you say that among your peers, you're having confident conversations about disability, or do you get a sense that people are still worried about bringing the topic up? That, worried they might use the wrong language, or that the language that they have may not be up to date enough?
I think the business community is very, very focused in reducing inequality overall in the workplace and in the communities that we operate in. In a number of conversations in our industry bodies like IBPAP and CCAP, we see a clear direction coming in from my peers, our organization's peers, that we have to focus more on getting a very diverse workforce. I don't think it is a taboo any longer. I think people understand that the investments are very inexpensive, and more importantly, there's a huge return on those investments. Plus, most of the publicly traded companies are now having a formal ESG strategy, and somewhere or the other, most organizations we are seeing are now graduating towards hiring people with disabilities and from different socioeconomic backgrounds to reduce those inequalities in the society.
Is there any help that you need from government to maybe better equip the persons with disabilities? You talk about collaborating with schools earlier. I wonder, because there's been a criticism that we don't have enough special education teachers in schools, for example.
Absolutely, Mimi. I think that's a great point. And, the biggest help that we really need is how do we make sure that there is social infrastructure available as people come up and are groomed. Because see, businesses can create infrastructures which are very confined to within those business spaces. How do you create an infrastructure which is all encompassing for a country, which is not just about the big metros, but also about the regional sites, the provinces? How do you create that social infrastructure? And really at the grassroots, it is about cases don't have the right set of sensitivity levels that are needed to make sure that the grooming of such individuals is right.
And when you really look at why the PWD segment is very important, not just as part of the workforce, but as consumers, if I may just share a meat, this is a data from Bloomberg. They collated from the World Bank, I think. They were estimating that there are 1.3 or 1.5 billion people with disabilities all over the world. Their spending power, the spending power of this group is estimated at $8 trillion. That's a lot of money. And there's really a big room for growth because just 4% of businesses are focused on making inclusive offerings. That's as of 2021. So I guess my final question for you, Amit, is what is the inclusion agenda moving forward, you think? What is the next goalpost for companies like Concentrix and this inclusion discussion?
Initially we started with goals like, how do we have more percentage of employees who are PWDs? I think as we graduate to that level and as we get more comfortable that yes, our workforce is representative of the actual population of the country and is genuinely diverse, the focus has to shift more on empowerment, the focus has to shift more on accessibility, the focus has to shift more on creating a barrier-free workforce which actually truly accommodates and helps utilize the right level of skill sets that PWD staff comes with. So I think that's where the agenda is moving now.
All right. On that note, Amit, thank you so much for the things that you do for persons with disability and for sharing with us insights about this inclusion agenda. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Mimi.
Now, another story. Relief efforts continue in Batanes, which bore the brunt of Typhoon Julian. Damage to agriculture, infrastructure, and housing now pegged at 813 million pesos. More than 100 houses were destroyed, while Basco Airport also sustained damage, although operational already. Power is also still out in 23 out of 29 barangays, while access to potable water remains limited.
Feeling namin super typhoon yung bagyo kasi sa lakas at mas yan ang mabagal yung bagyo kaya mas malaki yung sira halos nag-stay siya sa amin for how many hours? For more than 8 hours.
The Philippine Customs Bureau seized last week over 25,000 kilograms of fresh onions valued at around 2 million pesos from China. That's after the agency found that the shipment lacked the necessary sanitary clearance from the Agriculture Department. Philippine officials reiterate the importance of safeguarding public health following the seizure. The Clark Development Corporation maintains its contract with Metro Clark Waste Management Corporation will not be renewed after it officially expired last week. The CDC said extending the contract would violate the Build, Operate, Transfer law, which governs the bidding and awarding of contracts for such projects. CDC is a subsidiary of the Basis Conversion Development Authority, which earlier this year expressed its interest in the development of the 100-hectare land area currently covered by the contract with MCWMC in New Clark City. MCWMC has now been ordered to vacate and deliver the property, including all new constructions and improvements made during the term of the contract to CDC. A 72-hour temporary restraining order was also issued upon MCWMC's request. CDC has committed to complying with the TRO and will refrain from commenting further on the ongoing legal proceedings. To ensure uninterrupted waste management services, Prime Waste Solutions Pampanga has been accredited as the new waste service provider following the expiration of MCWMC's contract. Now here's a look at the other stories we're tracking in the newsroom today. Happening within the hour, Israel's embassy will commemorate the first anniversary of the Hamas attack, which sparked the ongoing war in Gaza. Also happening within the same hour, visiting South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol will meet with President Marcos in Malacanang. Well, at 2 p.m., President Marcos will attend the Philippine-Korea Business Forum in Manila. Also this morning, we cover the launch of the Public Financial Management Reforms Program 2024 to 2028 at the Asian Development Bank headquarters in Ortigas. We also continue to cover the filing of certificates of candidacy in the second to the last day. Expected to file today, DALG Secretary Ben-Hur Abalos. We are now showing you, I think this is the man in red. Is this Luis Chavit Singson? Yes. Yes, that is him. He is, of course, filing COC for senator. He's running for Senate in the 2025 elections. He emphasized his commitment to addressing key issues in the transport sector, including modernization and digitalization. We're also expecting former Senator Bam Aquino, Senators Bong Revilla and Manny Pacquiao to be filing today, while in the local races, we expect to see former PNP Chief Oscar Albayalde, Alger Abrenica in Pampanga, Aiko Melendez in Quezon City, Aramina in Pasig, and Cynthia Villar in Las Piñas. Again, today is day 7 of this 8-day window for filing of COCs for the 2025 midterm elections. Time for a quick break. Up next, market discussion with Aaron Sai of First Metro Securities as local investors gear up for a brand new trading week. Keep it here on ANC. You're still watching Market Edge. The headlines: former President Rodrigo Duterte set to run for Davao City Mayor. The Philippine poll body expects a deluge of last-minute COC filings for the midterm polls. And families of hostages still held in Gaza appealing for their immediate release after 1 year of the war. The PSE index kicks off from 74.67 after shooting up 1% on Friday as investors cheered September's inflation print, which came in lower, much lower than expected at just 1.9%. That is a 4-year low, while core inflation also eased. Can the market sustain the momentum, though? For his game plan this week, we want to bring in Aaron Sai, market consultant of First Metro Securities. Hi, Aaron. Good morning. Thank you so much for taking our call.
Yes, hi, good morning, Mimi. Thanks for having me here.
All right. It seems to be losing some steam, this rally. Today, actually, we're opening lower, not by much, just by 3 points. 3 points off, less than 1/10 of 1%, 74.64. We're seeing more reds than there are greens. You've got holding firm services, mining oil sub indices in the red, with services being the biggest loser, down by 1/3 of 1%. But in the big picture, we're in the green for 5 straight weeks already. Last week, we did crush expectations for inflation. You think stocks are up for all the right reasons, and could we be looking at Goldilocks for stocks here, despite, the day-to-day gyrations?
Well, actually, if you look at the chart of the PSCI, it's actually indicating that it's not quite ready, to give up its strength, at least not yet, As shared the last time I was here, we have been anticipating for signs, We thought, actually, we saw it last week, but the index just simply negated the signs of exhaustion and continued to march higher, But having said that, I think for the time being, even with the possibility of a bullish advance from where we are now, I think the PSCI would not go too far in the short term. The price action since the bottom in June brought indicators to overbought territory already, both on the daily and on the weekly chart. And also, we are currently trading the territory of a major market structure, which is the 7552 high the PSCI made in February 2022. And on top of those, I think the chart of the USD PHP is showing signs of possible depreciation in the short term. We can possibly see the peso actually going to around 57.20 to 57.60 in the short term. So this could contribute to reasons to anticipate correction in the main index.
All right, corrections. Did I get that right? What is the level, the resistance that we're looking at, the new support and resistance that we're looking at for the index?
Yes, for resistance, we are actually right there, so around 7,500. We made a high on Tuesday in the previous week at 7,474. But of course, the more I think the stronger structure high, that can serve as resistance for the market would be around 7,552. If we retrace back, and if the market respects this
Wow, 6.8 to 6.6. Huh. That's new. Because most of the analysts we talk to are saying, this is it. The easing cycle is fueling this heady run of the market. So you think we could fall to 6.866 still? Well, perfect opportunity to enter the market, right? What a great run we've had, clearly, in terms of the economic data, the narrative, good economy, bigger rate cuts. What could derail this narrative? Aside from the technicals, what else could derail it? Is it the ongoing war in the Middle East that could actually cause inflation to spike once again, with fuel very much in the spotlight?
Well, from where we stand now, the macro picture has completely reversed their bearish tendencies, especially in the stock market. We have seen the rates going lower, inflation has been going lower also. But of course, there would always be some pressure that could come to the recent developments in the geopolitical scene, which could possibly influence the movement in the oil price. So although if we look at the chart in the oil prices, the tendency that the market is showing us in moving forward is still to go lower. But then again, if the major conflict breaks out, then definitely the adverse reaction to this kind of events would be to push the price to the higher. And that would be bad for the market, especially on the inflation front, especially if it could contribute to anticipation of higher rates, even with the easing cycle.
All right. Is there anything that you're expecting, anything big or exciting that could be happening this week? I think we have a calendar. We have a few data points in the pipeline coming out. Let's flash that. There you go. Tomorrow we're getting Philippine jobs and industrial production numbers. On Thursday we're getting trade numbers. Today we're actually getting Forex reserves data. Anything here that you think could actually move the needle?
Yes, for tomorrow, I think the expectation would be a better figure compared to the recent figure. Now, as we know, the more than 4% unemployment rate that we have seen in the recent data was actually brought by factors such as the recent typhoons, among others. But for now, for the August figure that would be released tomorrow, I think the expectation of the market, which could compound on the good news from the inflation front last week, would be to improve at the very least from the recent print in unemployment.
All right. Just very quickly, Aaron, I want to go over some interesting corporate stories. We have this just in. Effective today, October 7, Kevin Tan has been appointed as an executive director of Mega World. He's actually taking over the post from his mom. Mrs. Catherine Tan has relinquished her position as member of the board effective today, October 7. She is going to be replaced by her son, Kevin Andrew L. Tan. Prior to his appointment, Kevin was already the 45-year-old Kevin is already holding the rank of EVP and served as Chief Strategy Officer for the property arm of Andrew Tan's empire. Just very quickly, when you see the next generation taking over key posts in very big companies, this is a sign of bullishness, right? This encourages signs of bullishness.
That can be a sign of bullishness or just plain aging. But I think what's good about the succession, I think the succession plans for most of the bigger companies in the Philippines or in the exchange have already been laid out years ago. And then we have seen this changing of the guards happening seamlessly. And I think this would not be a different.
All right. And over the weekend, we also got this. KKR has completed its initial investment in FINMA Education.
Yes, I think even the biggest conglomerates, like AC, even SM, are venturing and dipping their toes, and extending money to the education sector, which again is, I think, could make the gap between the industry and the academic closer, and maybe help the economy moving forward.
All right, I think we're now ready for your blind item. Talk to us about the stock that you're monitoring closely and that you like. Don't tell us, just describe. What do you have for us today, Aaron?
Well, this stock pick is purely based on the charts, the price action and the volume direction on this stock since its bottom in July suggests the bias of the market is more on the upside. If we look
strength indeed. The PSEI has reversed earlier losses. It's now up firmly in positive territory, up by 0.6%, 42 points. We're at 75.10. Again, we're now at the 7,500 level, 75.10. All right, Aaron, we're just going to have to see where this market goes for the rest of the day and for the rest of the week. Thank you so much for the time and the insights. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Amy. Have a great week.
You too. Time now to zip through the top headlines from major business papers and websites. From Insider PH, delays in Davao tycoon Dennis Uy led Tito CME Holdings share offer. Shares were expected to be priced just as the PSE entered bull market territory a few weeks ago, but it hit a major snag. That's as foreign investors were hemming and hawing over the deal value. Uy and a key strategic investor have yet to settle on pricing, with the offer potentially worth 4.2 billion pesos if shares are priced at 2 pesos 15 centavos each. At the low end, shares could go for 1 peso, the same price used in private sales to the mysterious Summit Telco Group. From Philippine Star, the Gokongways are making a big bet on the growth potential of domestic travel as their budget carrier Pac has bought out boutique airline AirSwift Transport from the Ayala Group for 1.75 billion pesos. This will add 5 turboprops from AirSwift, bringing its turboprop fleet to 20, building up its capability to reach island destinations. Also, it could bring a revenue driver potentially to the tune of billions of pesos. And from the Philippine Daily Inquirer, over 90 projects worth about 2 trillion pesos are queuing up in the One-Stop Action Center for Strategic Investments at the Board of Investments to acquire green lane certificates. Most of those projects are in the renewable energy sector. We're taking a quick break. Coming up, your favorite investment banker is back on the show to talk about how the upcoming elections could impact the economy as the COC filing nears its end. Market Edge. We'll be right back. In this edition of Stevenomics, we talk Philippines Inc. and how the 2025 midterm polls could move the needle, America's economic future under a Trump universe or a Harris world, and taxing the digital economy. And for closing, what our investment banker has been up to after dark. Stevie, welcome back to the program. It's great to see you. Hi.
Well, thank you for having me again. Happy to be here.
All right, so let's start with inflation. Big good news last week. Do you trust it? Is it as good news as we all think it is?
Well, okay, I trust it, but the question is, how long can it last? Because since we are an import-dependent country for everything from finished goods to food, the level of inflation is less under control than other countries' situation, because the amount that is sourced domestically is much lower than in equivalent countries. So if international inflation for what we import is low, it will be good for us. No matter what we do, if it moves up because of demand elsewhere, it's bad, or shortages, it's bad for us. So the news is legitimate, the news is good, but whether it stays good or bad is less under our control than other countries. That's the only caution I have.
All right, we're just going to have to wait and see. I imagine inflation is going to be one of the top issues when Filipinos head to the polls next year. May 12th, set the calendars there. 68 million Filipino voters will cast their ballots and elect over 18,000 officials, from senators, 12 of them, to district representatives, 254 of them, and nearly 18,000 governors, provincial board members, and mayors. You know, Stevie, more than anything, they say this is a referendum on the Marcos leadership and the fame of the Duterte family name.
Yes. From the second President Aquino's time to now, each midterm has become how dominant is the president's coalition. It's easy. So you see a handful of people winning under Aquino, and even some of the handful were not hostile but just not part of the coalition. Then during Duterte, you saw everybody who ran under Aquino's party lose. So let's see what happens now, because it's almost like all that matters is, are you with the president's coalition or not, assuming the president is popular, because it's not just, and not just that, it's, who funds campaigns. yourself or, basically rich people. And they don't want to basically get on the wrong side of whatever current administration there is. Now, how happy they are with the current administration determines how enthusiastic they'll be. But it's getting harder and harder, frankly, to be not allied with the major major coalition and win, especially for the Senate. Maybe you can do something if you have your own brand and the amounts are lower for the Congress and local posts. But for the Senate, the trend has been very, very clear in the last 4 administrations.
But Stevie, when they talk about the rich people bankrolling these campaigns, they're pretty smart. They don't put their eggs in one basket. They usually donate to everyone with a potential to win.
Yeah, but again, they're degrees, okay? So
someone will get the bigger share.
Are you giving 90% to someone and 20% just to say you didn't shut them out? It's not a matter of do I give to many people, which most prudent businessmen who contribute to campaigns do. It's the magnitudes. And then, to be blunt, besides the magnitudes, there are the people who, let's just say, are persuaded by them to give. They won't persuade people to give to the ones they're just giving out of prudence or politeness.
Lots of nuances in the field of politics. Do you think when you talk to business leaders and the rich class, Stevie, I wonder, do you get a sense whether the Duterte name still shines?
At least, I talk to a very small circle, so I don't want to sound representative, but I'll be 100% blunt since I won't name names. They're 100% for whoever the administration is. That's just the way it is. The only time they're really close to someone who's not in is either there's some personal tie, which supersedes that, or the incumbent is not popular. But that's the way it goes. It's reality. When you have personality-driven politics rather than policy-driven politics, then you'll go with the dominant personality.
And it's not usually just dominant personality, it's dominant family names from Indonesia to Thailand to the Philippines. It's a family business.
Let's say at work. If I didn't like my boss, would I tell him I don't like him? Or I'll just say yes and maybe be more enthusiastic if I like my boss?
Well, Stevie, I saw a pretty interesting data here from Bloomberg, actually, which said that 6 of the country's last 9 presidents have belonged to the Macapagal, Marcos, and Aquino families. 6 out of the 9.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm not going to comment on the qualifications of the next generation and heirs, but 150 million people, 2/3 have to come from 3 families.
Of course, it's not just the Philippines having elections next year. Before that, we're also watching the U.S. elections happening this November. Kamala Harris versus Trump. It's every election is a fork in the road. Do you think there's going to be a big glaring difference whether it's Harris or Trump that wins for countries like the Philippines?
Yes. Now, I won't give you my opinion on America and everything. I'll just limit it, even though people who know me know I'm 1,000% on one side. Okay, and the side doesn't start with the letter T. All right. But on the Philippines, it means protectionism or heavy-handed protectionism. Basically, forget about Washington Consensus, everything, because basically, if you look at the remark on April 27, 2023 in the White House's own website of National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he says the Washington Consensus was a promise that was not kept, and here is where we're moving. And that's mild compared to what Trump wants. So you talk about free markets, they're basically saying for Chinese electric vehicles, the tax has gone from 25% to 100%. And Trump's saying that's not enough. Now Europe, okay, the other home of the Washington Consensus, because it was Thatcher and Reagan, they're also increasing tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Why? Both of them are protecting their local electric vehicle manufacturers. So get real. Basically, they're basically saying we need inclusive growth, and if it comes at the expense of our trading partners, so be it. So I think it's time for us to wake up and start realizing economic thought and economic policy has moved from the 1980s, but because of our lack of critical thinking and our unquestioning faith in what we don't see.
Ang Provincial Station Balita ay tumatalakay sa mga isyu pang kasalukuyan at nakapanahon. Politika, opinyon, komentaryo at balita. Ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang pinapanigan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
It's like remember when you asked me in the previous show, is our government capable of doing it? The answer is not then don't do it. It's make our government capable of doing it. For example, you have a lousy bank. Are you going to give up on the whole banking system, or are you going to go to a better bank? Same thing. So if we need a better government that's better capable of delivering on industrial policy and everything, then let's do it. But to say, therefore, let's just not have it when every other country that's successful has some form of it. The only two that don't have industrial policy are city-states, Singapore and Hong Kong, because they don't need industry. They're a city. You should compare Singapore and Hong Kong to like Metro Manila, not to a country. Now you tell me one country that has not guided and aided selected industries to make them competitive.
So I guess
I'm not saying they do it perfectly. I'm not. Some do it better than others, but let's get real.
let's get started at the very least. Stevie, so the next question is, are you seeing green shoots, at least efforts, currently for this industrial policy?
I don't see a policy. I see interest in pushing manufacturing, but I don't see a policy. Now, having said that, some people are doing it. I'm seeing players in, like, for example, the steel industry going further, food manufacturing going further, because I don't count renewable energy as manufacturing. It is infrastructure, which is basically power, roads, transportation, things like that. Okay, telecommunications. That's infrastructure. Manufacturing is the production of goods. All right, whether input goods or finished products. I'm seeing some movement there, but I think to ask people to do it with a sort of generalized, we're now going to help you, is a step forward, which I congratulate this administration on. But given how far back we are, we need more. And look, we export people, and we have 2 million people joining the workforce every year because of our wonderful unbridled population growth. How much longer can you assume there's just going to be an infinite demand for everybody we want to push out because they won't have good jobs here? And with our crappy education and our terrible scores, will they be even qualified if they want to? So we really have to start looking at fundamental issues. And getting back to politics, here is my one biggest hope and dream. Other countries have pitched battles between political parties and groups. You look at Taiwan and Korea, where they're kickboxing and martial arts in the legislature. Okay, at least we don't have that here. But why do they progress much more than us? Because in most other countries, there are certain issues which are depoliticized and are a matter of consensus. Infrastructure, industrial policy, education, health, food security, those are givens. And regardless of what changes happen or don't happen, it continues. While with us, everything is a political issue that is relitigated and re-examined with every administration.
and then you add term limits, there won't even be the same administration.
That's something to keep in mind when everybody heads to the polls. Just one final question before we close this, Stevie. Last week, also big news was the VAT on digital transactions. They say it's not a new tax, it's just leveling the playing field. What are your thoughts on this? It essentially means that Netflix and Facebook will finally be taxed.
Most other countries do that. Every time I buy online or do online transactions in other countries, if there's a sales tax, I have to pay it. It's normal.
Okay, no big deal.
We've just caught up to that loophole, which is correct. I'm glad the administration does it. It's not exactly hard to enforce because all you do is you say no more delivery, no more anything in the country. You think I want to pay the New York sales tax when I have something delivered to my house or I buy online, even if I buy from outside? No, but I do because I have no choice.
So much ado about nothing then, that debate. Stevie, for fun, you wonder what does this banker do after dark? What do you do after dark? I think you showed some
not work.
Music and your passions. We're going to flash some photos just very quickly because we don't have much time. This is what this banker, Stevie Coniang, does after dark. Let's flash a photo. There you go. Who are these people? Who's this guy and why is he important?
Well, so I think it's Manfred Honeck, who's one of my favorite conductors. He's a regular guest conductor of all the major orchestras and he's the head of Pittsburgh. He's considered, if not the leading, one of the leading conductors of mainstream repertoire. Basically, Beethoven to Tchaikovsky. He's considered the best. His recordings are considered in the same quality of the giants of 20, 30, 40 years ago. And he was the guest of the opening night gala, which I went to the New York Philharmonic. Then just last weekend, he had a subscription concert where he played Beethoven's Seventh, and then this very good pianist, Vikingur Olafsen, who records for Deutsche Grammophon, was the soloist in Brahms Concerto No. 1, and one of my perks for being on the international board of the New York Philharmonic is if there happens to be a meet and greet reception after the concert, patrons are allowed to go, and I was very honored to meet him. And I'm one of, as you know from my previous call, my favorite composer Shostakovich, and my favorite work with all music is Symphony No. 5 of his. And I like his recording, and he was kind enough to dedicate and autograph the CD I have of his recording. So it was great fun. I was very excited and very honored. And we had a nice brief chat. I would have chatted longer, it's just that other patrons wanted to talk to him too. And I wasn't going to be, half the time.
I'm sure our viewers and your fans are going to be taking down notes to research some of the music that you just mentioned. And Stevie, before we go, let's watch this. We have something for you. Let's watch this. When you see those videos, what do you say?
Bad.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. Deliberately, not enough time this time around. Stevie, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next month. We have great big news we're going to share with our viewers. But thank you again for the time, Stevie. Have a great week ahead.
Thanks again. See you soon.
All
Bye.
Right. And before we go, for those who tried to guess your blind item, this is the pick of Aaron Sai, 16% upside in the short term. This stock is, drumroll please, MRC Allied. Let's say if got that, you tweet us at AIMSource. In the meantime, that's it for the show. I'm Michelle Long. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe and stay with ANC.
Mobility will be key to recovery because we have
We are coming down to the close of trade, 20 minutes away from the bell, the PSE index finally succumbing to profit taking. The index had supercharged to over 400 points this week after falling to an over 2-year low last week. Now traders locking in some of those profits. So as of 2:45, the index is off by 0.6%, 39 points. We're at 62.41. You're watching Market Edge. I'm Michelle Long. Good afternoon from the Philippines. Our top stories today. Philippine unemployment eases to 19-year lows with a jobless rate at 3.1% in December of last year. The PSE index falls back to earth after skyrocketing over 400 points in recent days. Investors locking in gains ahead of next week's Bangko Sentral policy meeting. SM Prime Holdings earmarks 33 billion pesos for its malls and commercial businesses. A look at its 2025 plans later on in the show. And what the most recent inflation number could mean for the central bank, BPI's chief economist June Neri joins us live. Plus later we hear from the business community on the vice president impeachment at the lower house. PCCI's George Barcelon will join us. Taking a look at how trading is faring this afternoon, we are seeing Philippine equities pulling back after a strong comeback at the start of the week. Now, is this dip temporary? Will we see a continued upward trend ahead of next week's BSP policy rate decision? How much more room for further value buying? Well, we'll find out, but in the meantime, the PSE index among your weaker performers in the region today, down by 0.6%, 62.41. The broader all-shares also down, though not as much, just by about 0.25%. If you look at the Philippine peso against the US dollar, it actually opened stronger, 57.92 against the greenback from yesterday's close of 58.1. But you are seeing the peso trade within this range, to 57 to 58. So a little bit of firming up in the peso. Now, let's take a look at the next slide, please. Let's flip the board. All right, there you go. We're seeing more reds than there are greens here. Aboitiz Power, a big gainer here, up by nearly 6%. So this is probably what's helping temper the losses in the index. But the big drags, BDO down by less than a tenth, ICTSI down by 1.7, Ayala Land by 2.3, and SM Investments, this is of course your heaviest weighted stock in the index basket, down by 1%. Now, here's a look at the local corporate headlines we are watching today. SM Prime Holdings is allocating up to 33 billion pesos this year on its commercial property businesses, which it sees benefiting from moderating inflation, easing interest rates, and election-related spending. Of that total, 21 billion will be for the expansion of the gross floor area across its network of 87 shopping malls. That's new developments of about 205,400 square meters, while over 124,000 square meters of existing mall space will undergo redevelopment. It expects to end the year with a total gross floor area of 8.08 million square meters. Meantime, 6 billion pesos will go to its hospitality and MICE businesses, where it plans to build 2 convention facilities and renovate hotel rooms, while another 6 billion will go to SM offices, which will develop new office towers and workspaces, which will include 6 e-com center, a 2-tower grade A office complex within the Mall of Asia complex. Meanwhile, food, ingredients, and industrial chemical giant DNL Industries confident the impact of escalating trade tensions between the U.S. and China will be less this time around on its export business versus in 2019, when its exports fell 25% year-on-year. In fact, the Lao-led firm says they can even benefit by supplying to companies who cannot source from either the U.S. or China. It adds, while volatility is expected in the near term, its pricing structure and its ability to adjust selling prices will help protect the company from wild swings in forex and commodity prices. DNL's exports account for about a third of the total top line. It grew 38% year-on-year in the first 9 months of 2024. And Asia United Bank says its e-wallet, Hello Money, has been getting a boost in customer base after becoming the first Philippine bank to integrate with the Philippine Statistics Authority's e-Verify system to authenticate a person's registration with the national ID system. The banking arm of the Robisco Group says it has already gained around 94,000 new Hello Money users as of February 3 of this year. And we move on now to fiber broadband provider Converge ICT Solutions getting a Tier 3 certification for the design of its soon-to-rise Caloocan data center. This is a validation that the said infrastructure was able to meet stringent design standards for redundancy, maintainability, and uptime reliability. The Caloocan data center is designed to accommodate 300 racks and will serve the company's operational needs. It is targeting to go online by March of the year. Now, on the other hand, Converge ICT's 1,200 rack data center project in Pampanga is expected to meet the future requirements of both its residential and enterprise customers. And finally, Robinsons Retail Holdings reporting that its core earnings for the full year of 2024 jumped 12.3% to 6.3 billion pesos, driven by higher gross profit and improved operational efficiencies. Now, net income attributable to equity holders of the parent firm more than doubled to 10.3 billion due to the one-time gain from the merger of Robinsons Bank into the BPI, which was booked in the first quarter. Now, for the fourth quarter alone, net income attributable to equity holders of the parent and core earnings increased by 62 and 22% year-on-year to 2.5 billion and 2.3 billion due to higher same-store sales growth and better cost dynamics. Now, for the full year of 2024, consolidated net revenues came in at 199.2 billion. That's up 4%, underpinned by sustained growth of the food and drugstore businesses alongside incremental sales from new stores. Moving on now, let's zoom out to the rest of Asia. Markets are on the advance following Wall Street higher in a week that's been marred by tariffs, lackluster tech earnings, and uneven U.S. economic data. A gauge of Asian equities rose for a third day to the highest level since December 18. Shares also up in Hong Kong and China, reversing Wednesday's losses, while the yen strengthened to the highest level since early December. That's as the Bank of Japan's most hawkish board member, Naoki Tamura, said interest rates could touch 1% in the second half of the fiscal year of 2025. The Nikkei 225 here, look at that, up by nearly 0.75%. Now, elsewhere in Asia, Vietnam's inflation quickened at its fastest pace in 6 months, while Singapore said it will announce certain stock market measures soon. The Straits Times Index also on the rise, up by 0.4%. Over to U.S. stock futures now, where contracts are also looking up. Take a look at that. Everybody in the green, up by about 0.25% each when trading resumes tonight, Manila time. Now, just a recap of Wednesday's trade stateside, major indices managed to recover from earlier declines, with investors shrugging off Alphabet's lackluster earnings and as they weighed the prospects of future rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq saw their second day of gains, with the Dow also in the green. Now, later today, we are getting Amazon's earnings as well as initial jobless claims data. A gauge of the dollar, meanwhile, little changed after 2 days of decline.
Investors get more and more weary as this bull market continues and we start to see more short-term bouts of volatility. So we need to follow those changes in market leadership that are already taking place thus far in 2025, such as technology not leading the way, such as value starting to outperform growth, and such as international stocks, at least international developed market stocks, starting to catch up to U.S. stocks.
Over now to Europe, where markets could get a little bit more action. Let's take a look at the board. Also in the up, led by the FTSE 100 in London. Futures up 1.2%. The DAX and the CAC 40 pretty flat, tilted to the upside. Similar to the U.S., traders in the Eurozone are waiting for more corporate numbers as well as the latest retail sales data, plus the Bank of England's first policy decision for the year. Of course, the Bank of England is expected to cut rates by 25 basis points when policymakers meet later today. Back here at home, the Philippines unemployment rate easing to 3.1% in December 2024 from 3.2% in November. Now, that's around 1.63 million jobless Filipinos. The improvement is thanks to more jobs added in the transportation and construction sectors. While sectors that saw the biggest job losses include agriculture, not surprising, forestry, manufacturing, and wholesale and retail trade. Meanwhile, underemployment, which covers those who have jobs but are still looking for extra income, slightly picked up to 10.9% from 10.8% the month before. The Philippine Statistics Authority says the figures for 2024 are the lowest in 19 years or since 2005.
So hindi to doon sa oras, pero kasi nagtatrabaho na sila ng more than 40 hours or more, pero ninanais pa rin nila na may magtrabaho, no, na additional job. Kasi pwedeng may trabaho ka ng 40 hours or more, pero yung kita mo hindi pa enough, kaya gusto mo pa ng another work, no?
But the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA, pointed out in a statement that although underemployment rose month on month, the number actually fell year on year. So that's if you compare the December 2023 and December 2024, which it said still suggests an improvement in job quality. This announcement comes amid a big push in Congress to legislate a 200 peso across the board wage hike. Now, our first guest today believes the possibility of a BSP rate cut next week has just increased, with inflation providing room for easing, while weak GDP data could push the central bank to prioritize growth. Let's welcome back on Market Edge, BPI's Oracle, June Mary. Hi, June. Great to have you back.
Hello, Mimi. Good day to everyone in your show. Yes, hello.
All right, so I want to start with the jobs numbers before inflation, because that's the latest number that we got. Are you happy with 3.1%? That is for December 2024?
Yes, that's consistent with the record low, Mimi. Hopefully it falls below 3% at one point. No? But more importantly, yes, the underemployment rate continues to remain elevated, and we really need to provide higher quality jobs for our workers so that their earnings can keep up with the high inflation, Mimi, which has already been accumulating over this past 3 years.
There you go. Leads us back to our big story, inflation. So do you think the BSP has inflation finally under control? Does the inflation story seem contained for now?
Well, they have some room. They have some space, Mimi, to cut maybe next week. But as you very well know, there are many threats that can affect supply. Supply shocks, not just from within our economy, but especially now from the US, if they do indeed push through with the tariff increases elsewhere in the world after their increases in China. So local supply shocks, of course, we saw vegetable prices continue to remain elevated for the month of January, despite the decline in rice prices finally contributing negatively to the headline. We continue to feel the shocks of food supply issues. So being a very disaster-prone economy will always lead to the possibility of inflation expectations. So BSP is very cautious to cut aggressively, Mimi. But it is open. The door is open. Hopefully there will be no emergency developments over the weekend that will allow them to reduce rates next week.
And you think, all in all, because the governor did say last year that the 100 basis point cut is too much. And I think earlier this week, or was it last week, when he said 75 basis points is also unlikely, which leaves us to 50 basis points. Are you are your expectations in line with that?
Yes, very much in line.
Ang programang station pinagbalita at ibabago ay tumatalakay sa mga isupang kasalukuyan at nakapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapapinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita ang programa ito'y patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang pinatangkihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Before we get the next installment.
Very hard to predict exactly where this will happen next. Maybe the Fed paused last week, and the March probability has continued to remain below 20%. So it looks like the Fed will skip again in March, and the earliest they will see a cut for this year will be second quarter. No? So we could also pull the trigger in the second quarter, but thereafter we feel that there has to be some cushion the policy rate at 5.25% is really a significant decline already from the 6.5 peak. 5.25 actually historically meaning very long history, meaning not the last 15 or 18 years, still actually quite it's already quite reasonable, Mimi.
So everybody talks about the neutral rate, the rate at which the BSP will not feel any pressure to cut or raise more. Is 5.25 a neutral rate?
I think we're already very close to the neutral rate, if not already at the neutral rate if we cut it all the way down to 5.25. But of course, that's subject to different opinions. Maybe some think that we can actually go lower on the neutral rate. Our own sense is, again, because things have changed quite a lot since the pandemic. So many climate, so many geopolitical risks that have emerged, that maybe we need to keep the neutral rate, or the neutral rate is probably at a much higher level now than it was prior to COVID.
What was the level of the neutral rate prior to the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, so I think some papers of the Bangko Sentral show that it's about 2 percentage points real rate, meaning the nominal rate less inflation. So that should bring us, if inflation is at 3, around the 5%. If the real rate is really 2%. So if we're gonna go to 5.25, then actually we're getting close to the 2% real rate already. But that's, of course, if we see inflation remain at 3%. If inflation starts falling to the 2% level again, then and if we see it pushing through to 4%, to 2% for the rest of the year, then BSP has probably more room. But then again, we have to be a little bit cautious considering all of these risks abroad. Deportation could translate to possibly slower remittances. I mean, it's not happening. It did not happen during the first Trump administration's term, but who knows if it will be a risk to the economy this time around.
That was actually my next question, June. How much How much of Trump 2.0 have you factored into your assumptions? Everybody says Trumponomics sounds like inflationary.
Yeah, for now, our central scenario, Mimi, is assuming that Mr. Trump will be a pragmatic president who will want his colleagues in the Republican camp to win again in the 2028 election. So, based on that assumption, while he does sound like he will introduce very radical policies such as 60% tariffs on China and so on and so forth and other countries, there is a possibility that he's just using these as levers so that he can ask for more concessions on other issues, including deportation and the like. So that's what we're assuming for now. But if he becomes too disruptive, too aggressive with his policies, then that is something we haven't really been able to fully price in yet, and precisely what our policymakers are trying to be a little bit conservative about.
And of course, before we get to the policymakers, the lawmakers, I wanted to get your take on the peso. You think, in your most recent BPI note, that the peso may come under pressure if the Federal Reserve leaves interest rates unchanged for longer, and you think that they likely will. How much pressure do you think is there for the Philippines to move in lockstep with the Fed at this point?
Well, first, Mimi, we need to see our current account deficit to stabilize. It widened again in 2024 for the first 9 months. If that continues to remain wide, then we will really be pressured to keep policy rates more steady, since we are now just maintaining a very narrow differential versus the US. So if the Fed doesn't cut because their inflation is still above 2%, it remains above 2%, and growth is fairly relatively firm, but our own inflation rate is already within target, it could translate to our local monetary authorities cutting more aggressively than the Federal Reserve. No, in the case where inflation is so low in the Philippines and the BSP is compelled to cut aggressively, the differential between our rates and the US could narrow significantly to pressure the peso to weaken. No? More so that I mentioned earlier, our current account deficit remains rather wide. No?
Mm-hmm. And final question, June. When you look ahead to 2025, what do you think are we not talking about enough? Maybe a high frequency data, maybe some factor, some element, or some part of the economy that we should be keeping a close eye on this year. This is a year, it's a midterm elections. This is a year when everybody was hoping for steep rate cuts, but apparently not as steep and not as quickly as many people hoped. Our stock market still in the doldrums. So what do you think? What are you watching very closely this 2025?
It's definitely U.S. policy, Mimi, because if Trump does push through with that postponed tariffs versus Mexico and Canada, the outlook is really a huge supply shock for everyone, especially in North America, and a huge supply shock would translate to stagflation, and that's something I think many of our investments today haven't even partially priced in. And it happened last week. It almost happened. Fortunately, it was pulled back. It was postponed. But that's something that keeps us on edge, maybe at the edge of our seats, literally.
June, could you connect the dots for us, though? I mean, Canada, Mexico, they're into oil, for example, agriculture. How is the Philippines, affected by that chain, by that supply chain there?
Oh yeah, so both Canada and Mexico will weaken significantly as a result of this. So will the U.S. because the U.S. is very much dependent on imports from Canada and Mexico. Car parts from Canada, oil, potash. The same with Mexico. So many of their inputs come from that country. If they suddenly implement tariffs so aggressively, a lot of manufacturing companies in the U.S. itself will weaken, and if the U.S. economy weakens significantly, their markets can really decline massively, and together with that, a slowdown in the U.S. economy because it's doing exceptionally well will pull down everybody else, including the Philippines.
Well, Trump wouldn't want that, would he?
Yes, but it's still early days, Mimi. So when you're trying to change things through policy, early stages of your administration, you really try to do the big things, the things that you cannot do when you're already nearing the election. So who knows? I mean, again, we're not counting completely on a pragmatic approach at the early stages of the new administration in the U.S.
All right. On that note, June, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing with us your insights and the time. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Mimi.
Now, moving on to more consumer-related stories. Fitch Unit BMI keeping its positive outlook for household spending in the Philippines this year. In its latest report, BMI projects consumer spending will improve by 5.3% this year from 5% last year. Value-wise, it says that could grow to 13.2 trillion pesos as it points to a still sluggish and recovering consumer confidence after the COVID pandemic. BMI, though, says elevated inflationary pressures and high debt levels will continue to affect spending. The Fitch Unit also projecting that inflation will go up higher this year to average 3.3% against the 3.2% from last year. It warns, should income growth fail to keep up with inflation, Filipinos' purchasing power will deteriorate and ultimately affect spending. And that could, of course, affect growth in a nation where household consumption contributes 0.75%. BMI expects the expansion rate to be at 6.3%, that is below the government's target range of 6.5 to 7.5%. The Philippine Agriculture Department confirms it has authorized the importation of onions to prevent potential price spikes. The agency says the country will import 3,000 metric tons of red onions and 1,000 metric tons of white onions. These are expected to arrive within the next 2 weeks. Agriculture Secretary Francisco Tiu Laurel Jr. notes this is to ensure the country has sufficient buffer stock, saying the agency does not want a repeat of the onion shortage which happened back in 2022. Prices of onions have seen an uptick in recent days, reaching as much as 200 pesos per kilo in some markets in Quezon City. Meanwhile, the DA has also set the price for NFA rice at 35 pesos per kilogram as part of government's response to its Food Security Emergency Declaration. Now, that is lower than the initial estimate of 38 pesos per kilo. The National Food Authority says it will release at least half of its 300,000 metric ton buffer stock over the next 6 months in a bid to stabilize market prices. The Philippine Transportation Department will start distributing fuel subsidies to public utility vehicle drivers next month, that is March. Transport Undersecretary Jesus Ferdinand Ortega says the move aims to help cushion the effects of currently high fuel prices. Under the 2.5 billion peso fuel subsidy program, each beneficiary will receive a financial assistance of up to 6,500 pesos. Around 377,000 beneficiaries nationwide have been identified. Various government agencies will lead the payout, including the Land Transportation Franchising Regulatory Board for GP drivers and the Department of Interior and Local Government for tricycle drivers. The Philippine Ports Authority assures the public the country's major ports are operating efficiently and far from being congested after the holidays and Chinese New Year celebrations. The agency says it has been implementing strategic measures to ensure Philippine ports remain competitive and resilient, including modernization and expansion of port infrastructure, digitalization of operations, and close coordination with private terminal operators and logistics providers. PPA General Manager Jay Santiago particularly notes the importance of digitalization in order to ensure more efficiency in their daily operations. The agency also optimistic about trade prospects for this year, driven by strong domestic consumption and sustained public investments. A bill banning the export of raw minerals 5 years after its enactment now being pushed following the Senate's passage of the Enhanced Fiscal Regime for Large-Scale Mining Act on third and final reading. The bill is now set to be transmitted to Malacanang for the President's signature. The bill sponsor, Senator J.V. Hersto, said the move will boost local industries, create jobs, and increase the value of mineral production by encouraging domestic processing over raw material exports, essentially following Indonesia's playbook. The measure, this one, the local one, includes a windfall profit tax, revised royalty structures, and stricter tax regulations to ensure government secures a fair share of profits in the mining industry. Once passed into law, Hersto expects the mining reform bill to generate an average of 6.2 billion pesos in government revenue. Time now for a quick break. Coming up, we're bringing the closing numbers at the Philippine Stock Exchange with our market chat with First Metro Securities Aaron Tsai. This is Market Edge. Welcome back. The market is closed. The numbers are in. Let's take a look at the board again. The PSE index snapping its 3-day winning streak. The bargain hunting that supercharged the index over 400 points in the last 3 days. Well, investors locking in those gains, taking profit off the table. The index down 0.6%. 2 days, 62.41.97. Let's now get more in the markets. Let's bring in Aaron Tsai, market consultant at First Metro Securities. Aaron, hi. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Mimi. Thank you for having me here.
So the recent market action, are they moving according to the technicals?
Well, what happened last week? What happened last week was beyond what we expect from technicals. Looking at the charts again, we previously thought the market could respect the 6158 bottom. We found ourselves in last year, I think June 2024. But again, the confluence of factors, no, again the reactions, no, in the U.S. market, and again most notably, no, the rebalancing exercise that the PSEI did, no, last week really exacerbated that bearish sentiment, no, as far as the price action is concerned. No? So good thing, no, that we rebounded strongly. No, the market surged 7.14% from the 5.862 bottom as of yesterday. But again, I think, no, the sentiment was really hurt. No, the sentiment was really hurt. The expectation that the support would hold was put into doubt. No, so I think the market now is in the state of still looking for the bottom, no? and the investors are.
You're breaking away from business news to make way for President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who is holding a briefing. Let's listen in.
And because, to tell you the truth, I've been a little bit dissatisfied with the ambush interview. Kasi some of the things that we talk about are not simple na yung isang soundbite lang kuha na. Hindi pwede yun. So, so I thought that we should have a proper press conference where you can ask your questions, take your time asking the question, hindi tayo nagmamadali. And to continue that, I think I've asked Cesar to arrange that we do this at least once a month, unless there's something very, very important, like there is today. Now, I know I have been watching, of course, I've been watching the coverage on the impeachment proceedings in the different, both from the traditional media and social media. And maliwanag naman na marami kayong itatanong. Kaya sabi ko, hindi naman yung mga sagot ko hindi makukuha sa isang sentence lang. Kaya kailangan siguro gawin na natin to. And so anyway, so let's start a subject on the impeachment of Vice President Sara by the House of Representatives. Now, I think it is useful siguro para maunawaan talaga natin ang mga pangyayari at bilang siguro parang paliwanag na rin doon sa mga tanong na nakikita ko sa mga commentator. Number one, maalala ninyo, nagsimula lahat ito nung I made the pronouncement. Sinabi ko na ayaw ko yung sana wag na tayo mag-impeachment dahil madaming ibang trabaho at hindi actually it's also not practical. Nung panahon na yun, nung una kong sinabi yun, wala pang nagpa-file ng impeachment. Kaya sana, I was hoping na makumbinsi ko lahat ng kung sino man, huwag na muna natin gawin ito. Kung meron talagang, kung talagang meron kayong paniniwala na kailangan gawin ito, huwag naman siguro muna ngayon at marami pa tayong gagawin. Kaya kung titignan naman ninyo, yung mga kaalyado ko sa House of Representatives, wala sa kanila ang mag-file. Wala, sa sumunod naman nila sa hiniling ko sa kanila na huwag silang mag-file ng impeachment dahil hindi magandang timing at saka marami pang problema. Ngunit, may ibang grupo, of course, the Makabayan group out of the House of Representatives, Senator Laila De Lima, the religious group nag-file ng tatlo. And if you remember, nung statement si JPE na sinasabi niya hindi pwedeng pigilin yan dahil may grupo na ayaw. I think he was referring to Iglesia ni Cristo. So sinabi niya, hindi naman natin pwedeng pigil dahil may grupo o may tao na ayaw yan. At sinabi ko sa inyo, nung tinanong niyo sa akin, sabi ko, I agree with him. Totoo. And if you remember, my words were this: they will now, once the impeachment complaints are filed, they have no choice. The House has no choice. The Senate has no choice. Kailangan nilang i-proseso ang impeachment complaint. And that's exactly what has happened. Once the impeachment complaints were filed, the House and the Senate they have no choice. Nakatali na kumay nila. They have to do this. And they have to do it in recognition of the complaints that have been filed. So, yun ang nangyari ngayon. And that's why we have come to this point where the House has transmitted already the impeachment complaint to the Senate. We have heard some of the statements made by the Senate President as to how he is planning to handle it. So we will have to see because it is many, as you've heard before, that we heard many times during the Corona trial, these impeachment trials are sui generis. And therefore, we have to be very clear how the rules are and how it will be conducted. Yun ang naalala ko because I was also in the House and I was in the Senate during the Corona trial. I have some understanding do sa mga procedure. But anyway, that's the way I see it. That's the way that happened. And now I'll open the floor to any questions of yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. First question, Ivan Marina, GMA7. Good afternoon, Mr. President.
Good afternoon.
While it is true na constitutional duty ng House na to act on the impeachment complaint, meron ho silang choice kung i-endorse sila o hindi. Diretsuhin ko na po yung tanong, did you have a hand in this impeachment?
No, the executive cannot have a hand in the impeachment. Walang role ng executive sa impeachment. Of course, did we discuss it with the Speaker? Did we discuss it with the other congressmen? Of course. And tinatanong, anong plano ninyo? Ano ba talagang gusto ninyong gawin? And that's it. Well, nandito na ito. Hindi na namin maiwasan.
But the conventional thinking, Mr. President, is that nothing comes to pass in the House without the President or without Malacanang's blessing.
Well, you give me too much credit. But again, what the House has done is clearly the mandate that they have been, the constitutional mandate that they have to proceed with the impeachment complaints. So that's why I don't. That I think they're just following the procedure. Tunod-tuloy ito, na-transmit nila ang impeachment complaints sa upper house.
One last point from my end, Mr. President. Kapansin-pansin na unang pumirma sa endorsement ng anak ninyo. Did he seek your advice on this, and what did you tell him?
Of course, he did. And I said, it was very simple, but I told him. And he said, you know, mukhang pipirmahan na. Well, what's your opinion on what I should do? And I told him, I said, the process is begun. It has, parang batas yan eh. When you're in the legislature, when you file a bill, okay, House Bill number 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. Pag file mo niyan, that bill takes a life of its own. Kahit anong gawin ng congressman na nag-file o senador na nag-file, kahit ayaw niya yung mga changes na magagawin doon sa kanyang bill, wala na siyang magagawa because the bill is going through the process as it should. And part of that process will be amendments, additions, all that. The impeachment complaint is exactly the same. Once it has been filed, there is a procedure that needs to be followed already. So sabi ko, andyan na tayo, sabi ko kay Kong Sandro, sabi ko sa kanya, the process has already begun. So, it's your duty now to support that process. So do your duty. That's what I told you. Do your duty. You have to support the process. You are constitutionally mandated to carry out that process. And you are a congressman, so do your duty. That's what I told him. I didn't know you'd be the first to sign it.
Maricel Halili, News 5.
Sir, magandang hapon po. Yes. Sir, you were very vocal before na ayaw niyo po ng impeachment because it's not the right time. But now na it's there already, paano niyo po ito nakikita na makaka-apekto, especially dun sa mga ongoing priorities?
Well, it depends on how the Senate chooses to handle it. Hindi pa maliwanag kung ano yung plano ni Senate President at saka yung ating mga senador. Kung paano nila gagawin, if they will immediately convene, if they will still study the rules, if they are going to wait until the next session. So we'll have to wait until they decide on how it's going to be.
Pero just to be categorical about it, sir, don't you see this as a defiance in a way, considering na naging vocal na po kayo before that this is not the right time, and yet nag-proceed pa rin yung impeachment case?
No. I'm sure that the parties that filed the impeachment cases felt strongly about it, and despite my importunings and expressing my opinion that we really would rather not have the impeachment, they continue to do that. So it's not defiance. Ganyan ang kanilang paniniwala. Sa kanilang paniniwala, kailangan gawin ito. Kahit na sinabi ko na sana wag na, hindi pwede, hindi namin pwede palampasin ito. Ganun ang thinking nila. So tinuloy nila. And I don't view that as a defiance. I view that as they're expressing what they feel to be right. Thank you.
Janelle Maribohok, UNTV. Sir, other issue. Sir, ano po yung nasa likod ng biglaang pagpapalit ng liderato po ng PhilHealth, at ano po ang inyong direktiba sa bagong PhilHealth President, sir?
Actually, kung titignan ninyo ang qualifications ni Dr. Mercado, he is very, very well versed in both the hospital administration, insurance, and his whole life has been devoted to healthcare. And so, it was after nung nag-oath taking kami, matagal kami nag-usap. Sabi ko, baliktad, hindi ko siya ina-advise, he's the expert. So, tinanong ko siya, ano sa palagay mo ang kailangan natin gawin? And we went, pareho kami, immediately napunta yung usapan sa digitalization. Kasi maganda naman ang serbisyo ng PhilHealth, ngunit yung pag-process ng claim, pag-apply, etc., hindi kinakamay pa rin. Kaya't napakabagal. And that's why that became a priority. But of course, beyond that, he has many other ideas on how to make the services of PhilHealth more inclusive, expanded, and again to give better coverage for different conditions for those who will avail of the PhilHealth services and of their financial support.
Sir, nag-resign po ba
Sinabi niya sa akin, that's as far as I can tell you. Sabi, I'll go first, I'll go to say in a week's time, sabi niya sa akin, in a week's time, may bigyan kita ng report, much more detailed, kung ano sa palagay ko yung nakikita ko sa PhilHealth na pwedeng palitan, pwedeng palakihin, etc.
Sir, may we know, nag-resign po ba si Relia Desma?
Well, yes, he left his position already. Sabi niya that mahirapan na rin yata siya with all of hindi siya sanay sa politika. Mandy Ledesma very much comes from the private sector, so I think he found the transition to be jarring, shall we say.
Thanks. Sonia, you, People's Jordan.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, just would like to get your thoughts on Representative Marcoleta's statement that there is no such thing as the West Philippine Sea.
Okay. He's expressing his opinion. When I see him, lulukuhin ko siya. He's a candidate, so he has to grab headlines, di ba? So, tama yung ginawa na for a candidate. Ngayon, ever talking about him na. magaling talaga siya sa ganyan.
Sir, yung Chinese monster ship nasa West Philippine Sea for more than a month now, how are you going to respond to this? Will you change your approach? Kasi parang hindi naman umaalis doon sa area.
Well, we don't have the means na paalisin. Hindi naman, buti kung meron tayong aircraft carrier na may kasamang destroyer, frigate at saka submarine na pupuntahin natin doon para matulak silang palayo. Wala naman tayong ganun. Kung sa palakihan at paramihan lang ng barko, malayo tayo sa China. Pero ang policy naman natin is that we will just continue to defend our territorial, our sovereign territory and our territorial rights in the EEZ. Yun lang. Kahit ano pa, ang iniisip na, ano bang mission ng Coast Guard? Ano bang mission ng Navy? To protect the territorial integrity of the Philippines. So that's what they will do. They will continue to do that no matter what any other foreign power does. That is what we will do. When we detect the presence of a foreign vessel who is beginning to intrude or coming close already to our coastal waters, papupuntahan natin ang barko. And we will challenge them. And we will make sure that they know that this is what they are doing is illegal. Of course, they will counter saying that they're doing regular peacekeeping law enforcement patrols. But they will always find they will always find the Philippine presence no matter what they do. Kahit na kahit na banggain na yung barko natin, kahit na mag-water cannon sila, mag-laser sila, kahit kung ano bang gawin na mag-block sila, laging nandiyan ang Philippines. They will always do it.
Ang mga station ng balita at ibabaw ay tumatalakay sa Facebook ang kasalukuyan at nakapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapapininon, mapakomentaryo at balita ang programa ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakarumihan, at walang pinapamitan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Sir, last na lang from you. Sir, last week you said you had a deal with China. You nagbigay kayo ng kondisyon sa China na you will pull out the typhoon missile if and when China will stop its aggression. Nag-respond na po ba ang China about it?
No. I didn't expect them to either. Because no, I didn't expect them to, and they haven't responded specifically. They've responded in general terms, saying that what they do is a lawful exercise in law enforcement and all that. But no, nothing specific on the missiles, nothing specific about the reduction of tension, the reduction of the aggressive moves, and nothing like that. Wala kaming napag-usapan na gano'n.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Alexis Romero, Philippine Star.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Now, let me just go back to one of our interviews during one of your previous US visits sa Honolulu, Hawaii, when asked about the looming impeachment supposedly that time against Vice President Sara Duterte. When asked, you told reporters, you told us, binabantayan namin